Do you feel lost, like you've wandered into a dense, shadowed wood, unsure of the path forward? Do distractions pull you from the still, small voice, leaving your soul restless and searching? Have you felt the weight of silence and wondered if God has left you alone? Here on the Distracted Christian Podcast, we walk that dark night together. Every step draws us closer to the one who's been waiting. His love is the light that guides, His grace, the compass that never fails. A single flame flickers in the hollow of a chapel long abandoned. Its flame blowing gently back and forth like a mourner over a grave. And the air tastes of old wood and ash, of hymns sung long ago, left hanging in the rafters like cobwebs. The pews sag inward as if carrying too many unsaid prayers, and every board in the floor remembers a footstep that hasn't returned. Dust hangs in the last slant of the twilight like incense, thick and golden, spinning slow. The sun, having done its part, withdraws behind the trees with a kind of aching reverence. Outside, the wind stirs, low and mournful, rattling the bare branches of a dogwood tree. They claw softly at the stained glass windows as if trying to get back in, as if someone who once belonged here somehow forgot to knock. The stained glass doesn't shine now, it weeps in silence. And there, in the center of the room, beneath the brittle hush of sacred neglect, sits a single chair. Empty, still. Worn smooth by someone who once long ago, perhaps to weep, perhaps to wait, but who has since walked off into the hush. The chair does not ask questions, it only waits, it only holds. This is the space that we're entering today. The space between breath and voice, between prayer and silence, between effort and surrender, the long hallway between faith remembered and faith remade. If you find yourself weary tonight, or hollow, or aching in a place that no one can quite name, then you may be exactly where you need to be. For this is where the soul begins to loosen her grip, where the scaffolding falls and something eternal peeks through the cracks, where sadness isn't something to fix, but something to feel and maybe in time befriend. So sit with me in this stillness, in a place where floorboards groan and the silence hums like a hymn with no words. The candle still burns, the wind still speaks, and the emptiness is not so empty. It's waiting for us. Welcome to the Distracted Christian Podcast. I'm your host, Nate Labadorf, and tonight in episode 11, we enter chapter 10 of The Dark Night of the Soul. St. John of the Cross does not offer steps here, he offers silence. Not the silence of absence, but of presence so deep it no longer needs to speak. He writes to the soul who has lost all sweetness in prayer, all clarity in meditation, and all comfort in effort. The one who fears she is failing when in truth she is being transformed. This episode is for those who feel numb when they kneel, who try to pray but only can sit still, who wonder if they've been left behind when in fact they are being led ahead. Today we're going to talk about egoic striving, Job's long ache, and what it means to stop trying and simply let yourself be seen. But first, let's breathe. Let the silence be your sanctuary, not a threat. Let your loneliness be met not with noise, but with nearness. Because here, in the tender hollowness, something holy is being born, not through striving, but through surrender. There are seasons when the soul forgets the sound of spring. It sits in a hush that no longer feels like prayer, just a strange, empty quiet. No thrill of insight, no sweet warmth when one speaks the name of God. Just breathe in, breathe out, and a stillness that feels so wide it feels like being lost. But it is not lostness, it is the drawing in of God. In chapter 10 of The Dark Night of the Soul, our friend John of the Cross, Pilgrim of Shadows, turns to speak to those caught in the dusky husk of the first dark night, the one that comes not to punish, but to pull the soul from the shallows of into deep waters, the night of the senses. And as he reminds us time and again, this is not the silence of God's absence. It is the silence of a deeper presence, one that no longer speaks to your faculties, your cleverness, your memories, your tears on command, but one that calls beneath them, like deep crying to deep, beyond your reach. And yet, in this time of spiritual drought, the soul suffers, not from thirst alone, but from confusion. It longs to return to this earlier sweetness of meditation. You remember what it felt like, a warm presence when you read the Psalms, a spark of joy when you wept over the cross, the sturdy rhythm of your thoughts ordering themselves before God. That was how you knew He was near, when your mind could find Him. But now, that light is gone, and the soul, poor creature, grows frightened. She flails in the silence, trying to recreate the old ways of touching God, repeating thoughts, forcing feelings, pressing herself into devotion as if holiness were something to be wrung from a dry cloth. She thinks she is failing. She is not. This, St. John tells us, with the voice of one who's walked through this fire, is the very proof that God is still at work. The soul is not being forsaken. It is being invited, drawn out of her reliance on the senses into the stillness of infused contemplation, where God begins to do the praying inside of her. But this transition, like a birth, is marked by a travail. Not loud and writhing, but of quiet and crushing in its disorientation. The soul wants to return to what it knows. She wants to pray as she once prayed, actively, cognitively, with the dignity of effort. But now even effort tastes of bitterness. Her heart resists it. Her spirit shudders against it. Not because she is lazy, but because she is being reformed, and that old garment of striving no longer fits. So she begins to doubt. Am I backsliding? Have I sinned? Has God withdrawn His hand? No, child. You are not being punished. You are being painted. Imagine a portrait being brushed slowly with oils. The painter needs you to sit still, docile, and yielded, but you, full of worry, keep twitching, wanting to help, to participate in painting your own portrait, to show that you are still faithful. And in that moment, you smudge the work being done. Better, says John, to stay still, to allow the Holy One to shape you by this quietness, even when your soul wants to leap up and prove itself. You will feel useless in this state. You think yourself slothful. You worry that your time in prayer is wasted, that your heart is dull, that you ought to do something. Let that anxiety come and go, like wind over tall grass. Your only task is to remain, not active, but attentive, not striving, but surrendered, not seeking, but still. This is not nothing. This is how God writes His love inside your bones. For you are being given a new kind of prayer, not born of your strength, but of His tenderness, a prayer that rises not from your thoughts, but from a flame hidden beneath them. That flame is infused with love, and it comes like kindling in the dark. No spark you lit yourself, but one you received in waiting. If you try to grasp at it, it will vanish. If you try to manufacture it, it will resist you. If you let go and let yourself burn. It will deepen. This is not the time for reasoning or rehearsing old devotions. It is the time for letting yourself be undone, for allowing the old scaffolding to collapse so that something more enduring can rise in its place. When thoughts fail and emotions go numb and the memory of God feels dry as dust, this is not the loss of grace. This is its arrival in disguise. The soul in this state must not panic. She must not grasp at the former lights. She must not fear the silence nor mourn the absence of joy. Instead, she's called to something more beautiful and understanding. Trust. And so John urges us to hold steady. Do not turn back. Do not force the soul to return to its old city when God is leading her out towards the promised land she cannot yet see. Let her wander if she must, in the desert of not knowing. But there's water beneath the sand. There's always water. Let the soul rest. Let her sit without answers. Let her breathe without the compulsion to achieve anything in prayer. Let her love quietly, simply, as one who watches a fire from across the room, glad to just be near it, even if the warmth takes time to reach her skin. Even her longing, if she begins to yearn to violently for God's touch, can become a distraction. For now, let all yearning rest in God's hands. Let her lean towards Him without needing to feel Him. For this is contemplation, a secret, peaceful, and loving infusion from God, a soul uh, so deep and saturating, a rain in the roots, and the soul, if she does not meddle, will be lit with a fire not her own, a flame God can only tend. So, if you are in this night, friend, do not fear. Do not measure your prayers by how it feels. Do not try to stir up wind when the Spirit is moving beneath the ground. Be still. Let yourself be loved not through what you do, but through what you let God do in you. He has not left you. He is nearer now than when your heart once burned bright. You are being drawn into the holy hollow of His silence, where He speaks in ways only silence can hear. There is a part of the human self, fragile, reaching, often hidden, that wakes early before the sun or the demands of the world have fully risen and begins to labor. It moves silently at first, arranging its worth like furniture in a room. It hopes someone will one day enter and admire. It builds identity through the tools it has been given: performance, helpfulness, insight, and control. We all call this part the ego. We call this part the ego. It's not an accusation, but a kind of recognition of what this self is. Its striving is born not from arrogance, but from ache, from the early belief that love must be earned and safety must be manufactured. The egoic striving is this tireless effort of the self to secure meaning, coherence, and belonging through effort and self management. It surfaces as overwork, overthinking, and the endless pursuit of excellence. Edit. And the endless pursuit of excellence or spiritual purity. It is the invisible agreement we make with the world, as if we say, if I'm good enough, I will not be abandoned. If I'm wise enough, I will not be humiliated. If I am strong enough, I will not be vulnerable. What makes this form of striving so complex is that it often wears the face of virtue, but it's masking its fear-driven origin behind achievement and self-sacrifice. From the perspective of developmental psychology and psychodynamic theory, this kind of striving is neither random nor pathological. It's just adaptive. The child raised in an environment where affection was inconsistent or conditional learns to hustle for love, to perform for approval, and to suppress needs that might threaten the connection. And as adults, this early conditioning becomes embedded in our nervous systems and our beliefs about ourselves and others. Even when the environment changes, this adaptive strategy remains. The ego continues to strive not because it is greedy necessarily, but because it is still afraid. Within clinical settings, these patterns often emerge as over identification with a particular role in society, or productivity, or spiritual disciplines, even. The client may be praised for the diligence or insight, but beneath the surface lies exhaustion, emptiness, and a persistent sense that something essential is missing. The striving itself becomes both the symptom and the coping mechanism. It prevents the very rest and connection it longs for. And because it once worked, because those adaptive strategies at one time worked in the past, because it shielded the psyche from unbearable vulnerability, it feels nearly impossible to release. Under sustained pressure, however, the architecture of the egoic striving begins to crack. Research reveals how stress can cause higher ordered goals like those connected to meaning, morality, or relationship to collapse, replacing by short term survival based behaviors. The individual, once oriented towards purpose, may now spiral into perfectionism, reactivity, or even despair. The striving intensifies even as it fails to deliver relief. It is a cruel paradox. The harder they try to fix the pain, the more distant healing becomes. In psychotherapy, the collapse can look like burnout, disorientation, or what some call existential fatigue. The client may report feeling numb, directionless, or unable to access the spiritual or emotional clarity they once knew. Their thoughts spin in circles, their emotions feel dull and overwhelming. And the practice that once soothed them, like prayer or journaling or meditation, suddenly seems inert. Often they interpret this shift as regression or failure. But what if something? But what if it's something else entirely? What if the soul is no longer cooperating with these maladaptive strategies because they prevent its deeper integration? And this stage is not unlike the spiritual territory described in St. John of the Cross. It is a night not only of the senses, but on the self that once relied upon those senses to navigate its inner world. Anna Freud's work on defense mechanisms gives us the language to understand this as a release of control. The ego is no longer able to repress, rationalize, or intellectualize its way towards peace. The system is overwhelmed, and yet, paradoxically, it is also opening up. The invitation of this moment, therapeutically and spiritually, is not to do more, but to be still. This runs counter to nearly every impulse within egoic striving. Stillness feels passive, inaction feels like failure. But what is really being asked is to surrender the compulsion to manage, to perform, to curate one's inner life. It is not indifference, it is not giving up. It is the sacred art of yielding to a deeper wisdom that cannot be reached by effort. And psychodynamic therapy honors this threshold with gentleness and invites the client to witness rather than to solve, to allow rather than interpret, to sit in the silence without rushing to fill it with meaning. And so we'll return to chapter 10 of The Dark Night of the Soul, where St. John speaks directly to the soul in this condition. He describes a person who tries to pray but cannot, who attempts to meditate but finds only resistance. They believe they're doing nothing. They worry that they are wasting time, that they are failing God, that their emptiness is a sign of unworthiness. But John's voice is clear and kind. He says, "Let them remain in peace, contenting themselves with a peaceful and loving attentiveness." Here, is where theology and psychology intertwine like roots beneath a dark forest floor. The saint's guidance echoes those therapeutic principles. Don't strive, don't cling, don't force. The soul is being led not by the ego's effort, but by a subtler invitation, a movement beneath awareness, a flame beneath the ash. John compares the soul to the canvas, uh, still beneath the painter's brush. If it moves, it disrupts the work. If it rests, the image will come forth in time. This is the paradox of the heart of all true healing. This is the deepest transformation that comes not from conquering the self, but from surrendering to what always already is. That we are loved not for what we achieve, but for who we are when we achieve is all stripped away. Edit. That we are loved not for what we achieved, but for who we are when all achievement is stripped away. That the dark night is not a punishment, but a preparation. So if you find yourself here in the silence and confusion and stillness that feels like failure, do not flee. Do not return to the scaffolding. Sit gently with your breath. Let your tears come if they wish. Let the ground of your being hold you, even when it feels like you are falling. You are not lost. Yes, you are being unmade in all those ways that once kept you from being known. And in the hollow of this night, the deep and sacred stillness, something tender is being born, not through your striving, but through your surrender. There are few cries in Scripture as honest and as anguished and as necessary as the voice that rises from the ash heap in the book of Job. In this ancient poem, we do not find answers wrapped in neat theology, but a slow unwrapping of the human soul under unbearable pressure. Job, once a man of uprightness, wealth, and spiritual discipline, finds himself disoriented by pain, divine silence. And his story is not one of rebellion, but of reckoning. A long night where his previously ordered inner world becomes undone. What emerges is not a systematic theology of suffering, but a sacred space where egoic striving collapses and something deeper is formed in the stillness. From the beginning, Job's life was marked by careful righteousness. He sacrifices continually for his children in case they have sinned in their hearts, he says. He walked blamelessly before others, extending justice to the widow, mercy to the poor, and integrity in all of his business doings. He is not only good, he is intentional with his goodness. In this, we glimpse a man whose inner sense of worth and security is tied, however humbly, to his efforts of faithfulness. Job's life in its earliest chapters is shaped by the quiet belief that righteousness and reward are tethered, a belief held not just by Job, but by his entire friends and a lot of their wisdom tradition, from which this book partially emerges. But then the storm breaks. Within a few verses, Job loses his children, his wealth, and his health. He is struck not only in body, but in his theology. His friends, speaking from ancient assumptions that God rewards good and punishes the wicked, urge him to confess this hidden fault. But Job insists on his innocence, not as a defense of pride, but because he genuinely believes his way of living should have safeguarded him. And here we see the first cracks in the ego's architecture. Job had not built his life on arrogance, but he had built it on predictability, order, and that silent assumption that spiritual effort equals divine protection. The egoic striving in this light is not merely ambition or pride. It is that hidden contract we believe we signed with God. If I do this, you will do that. If I am good, you will bless. If I pray right, fast long enough, love well, then I will not be forgotten. This striving is not sinful in the traditional sense. It often arises from sincere hearts trying to survive a complex world. But it becomes a barrier when it clings to God only as a system and not as a person? Would it interpret suffering as failure rather than God's invitation? In his long speeches throughout the middle chapter, Job oscillates between lament and accusation and longing. He cries out, not only in pain, but in protest, I loathe my life. Why did you bring me out of the womb? Yet even in his rage, he speaks not to God. Edit. Yet even in his rage, he speaks to God, not away from him. His is not the language of apostasy, but of an aching, burdened relationship. He demands an audience with the divine, not because he has lost his faith, but because his faith has been stripped of its former clothes. Job, in his agony, begins to move from transactional trust to relational pursuit. The ego does not surrender easily. It will negotiate, plead, and perform before it releases its grip on control. We see this in Job's reasoning, his longing for vindication, for the restoration of his name, for someone to explain the math that no longer adds up. He yearns for a courtroom in which to make his case. And yet, over time, his words thin, his arguments taper into silence. The deeper work begins not in his reasoning, but in his relinquishment. This is the very dynamic described in chapter 10 of The Dark Night of the Soul. St. John of the Cross writes of the soul who, once having found comfort and clarity in meditation and effort, now finds those paths dry and desolate. The spiritual disciplines that once brought sweetness now bring nothing but silence and resistance. The soul, he says, must cease striving and instead remain in peace and quietness, trusting that God is at work beyond perception. So it is with Job here. His speeches reach this crescendo, and then they cease. The striving soul goes out quiet. And into that silence, the whirlwind comes. But the voice that speaks from the whirlwind is not what Job or we might expect. God does not explain suffering. He does not justify himself. He asks questions. Hey, where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth? Have you comprehended the expanse of the earth? The divine response is not didactic, but poetic. An unveiling of mystery, not a resolution of pain. God expands Job's visions beyond his suffering to the untamable beauty and order of creation. In doing so, he does not dismiss Job's sorrow, but situates it in a larger, ungraspable grace. This shift is not about silencing Job, but about softening the ego. Job, humbled but not humiliated, responds with one of the most profound lines in all of Scripture. I have heard of you by the hearing of the ear, but now my eyes see you. In that sense, his striving ceases. He is no longer arguing with God. He no longer needs to understand. The presence of God, unmediated and unexplainable, becomes enough. It is not that Job found answers. It is that he has encountered the answerer. There's a curious and tender thing here, isn't it? God does not require Job to repent of sin, but to release his limited knowing. Who is this that darkens counsel without knowledge? God asks, not condemning Job and his friends, but inviting him into awe. In the mystical tradition, this moment is known as the unveiling, the stripping away of lesser certainties so that the soul might meet God, not in comprehension, but in communion. The ego, having run out of strategies, finally bows, not in defeat, but in love. The restoration that follows, children, flocks, and fortune, is not a reward for performance for Job. It is a symbol of resurrection, a way of saying that nothing is wasted, not even the ashes. Yet we must not rush into this ending. The healing begins not with the new blessings, but with a new outlook, a new gaze. Job sees differently now, and that seeing changes everything. For those of us who find ourselves in a similar night, where prayer feels empty, where effort yields no fruit, where silence stretches long and wide, the story of Job offers a holy mirror. It reminds us that our own striving, though sincere, cannot carry us through the depths. At some point, we are invited to stop clinging to our outcomes, to surrender up our formulas, and to sit in stillness that we once feared. God urges us to persevere in patience, trusting Him and trusting that He's painting something upon our souls too subtle for us to perceive right now. Job 2 discovers that that is not effort that leads to seeing, it is surrender. This surrender is not resignation, it is release. It is the quiet inner shift from why is this happening to me to who are you in the midst of it? Who are you, God, in the midst of this? It is a soul ceasing to demand and beginning to behold. And in that beholding, something deeper than understanding dawns. A peace that does not depend on answers, a love that does not require merit, and a presence that remains even in the whirlwind. There comes a time when the soul can no longer push forward, when prayer dries on the tongue, when the heart grows tired of explaining itself, and even the will to keep going feels foreign. It is not despair exactly, it is something older, quieter, and more stripped down. You are not empty of God, though it may feel that way. You are being emptied for God. This is the season Job entered, uninvited. It is the train of the soul described in chapter 10 of The Dark Night. It is not a place to escape from, but to dwell in with courage and a strange sort of reverence and joy. And though the world around you may shout for productivity, healing, and resolution, the deeper wisdom, the wisdom of ashes, wind, and spirit, offers you something else entirely. Not steps forward, but steps inward. And so here are 3 action steps, or really non-action steps, quiet thresholds for the soul that no longer finds God in striving. What can you do? First, let your hands fall open. We begin here not with a task, but with a gesture, not with fixing, but unclenching. When Job sat among the ashes, scraping his wounds with broken pottery, he no longer held anything in his hands. The wealth was gone, the sacrifices had stopped, even his words, which once argued and persuaded, eventually gave way to silence. In your own life, you may feel the same unraveling. The prayers that once comforted you now echo in silence. The spiritual disciplines that once steadied you now feel thin and brittle. You wonder if you are regressing, but this is not a regression, it is reverence. You are being invited to stop holding it all together and let your spiritual tools fall quietly beside you for a moment. Let your formulas and expectations be placed gently on the ground. This open-handedness is not defeat. It is not the beginning of trust without condition. Edit. This open-handedness is not defeat. It is the beginning of trust without condition. In the stillness, your soul becomes like a blank canvas, ready for God to paint upon it. If only you stop moving long enough to let Him paint. There's no technique here, no hidden right way to release. I simply turn my palms upward, literally, and say, I'm here, I'm letting go and I pray the simple prayer, Jesus Christ, Son of God, have mercy on me, a sinner. This is not an abandonment of all spiritual practices. This is a moment in time when the spiritual practices are just simply works and not actual communion with my God. For a time, I sit quietly and release my grip, and I listen for the voice of God, and I will come back to Bible reading and prayer at a little later time, but there are times when just letting my hands fall open is all I can do and all I should do. Letting go does not mean that you cease to care. It means you are willing, at least, to stop bargaining, to stop proving, to stop clinging. This is not a passive surrender. It is a deeply alive surrender to God. You are loosening your grip even on the spiritual stuff so that you might finally receive something not of your own making. Second, stay with the silence. Once your hands are open, you may expect an immediately filling, a word, a sign, a surge of joy, but often what follows is not a voice, it's silence. You may be bewildered, and your soul may no longer find pleasures in this meditation and finds no clarity in contemplation. And in this state, there is no sense of doing, no sense of receiving, only the quiet ache of not knowing. Here is where most people turn back. They return to activity, to mental striving, to trying to feel something again. But if you can stay, just stay with the silence, something begins to shift. Job's silence after God's reply is not resignation, it is reverence. He stops talking because he is silenced not only by fear, but because he sees God. He does not need to win an argument anymore. He simply beholds. And in that beholding, something eternal touches his something wounded. And it is enough. Staying with the silence means refusing to judge it. You don't need to label it as failure or depression or distance. Just let it be what it is. A pause on the feelings of that which is holy. A space where your ego, yourself cannot perform. It will feel like nothing is happening. But that's because the most important things often grow in secret. Seeds do not sprout in the light, they wait in the dark. So wait here, not because it's easy, but because it's real. Third, let yourself be seen without striving. Allow yourself to be seen, not for what you accomplish, not for how well you pray, not for what you understand, but simply for who you are when everything else is stripped away. This is not edit. This is the great fear of your ego. To be seen in its weakness, naked, weeping, confused, unproductive. This is what Job feared as well. This is that he had become contemptible in God's eyes, that somehow his suffering was proof that he was unworthy. But God never accused Job of this, even in the whirlwind. God does not shame him. He expanded him. He lifted his gaze. He let Job see that his worth was never tied to his wisdom, his words, or his former righteousness. He was loved, not because he got everything right, but because he was made in the image of God. In your own seasons of stillness, you may feel exposed. You may feel like failure. But what if this is the moment God has been waiting for, not because he needs you to collapse, but because he longs to meet you beyond the roles you've carried for so long, To let yourself be seen without striving is to say, "Here I am, not as I wish I were, but as I am." This is not self neglect, it is sacred self honesty. And in that honesty, healing begins, not through fixing, but through communion. This, the truth is, God already sees you. He is not waiting for your life to be tidy. He is not withholding himself until you return with your former strength. He meets you here, in the silence, in the ashes, in the gaze that lingers even when your eyes cannot lift. These are not steps of effort, but of stillness. Not tools, but invitations. They do not promise immediate peace, but they open the door to a peace that passes understanding. A peace that does not depend on being impressive or strong or even whole. Let your hands fall open. Stay with the silence. Let yourself be seen without striving. This is the hidden path Job walked. This is the dark night St. John described. And it is the path, somehow, that leads us into deeper communion with our God. And that brings us to the end of today's reflection. If you're still with us, sitting in the quiet, breathing a little deeper, thank you. Thank you for making space for mystery, for bringing your questions and your weariness, and for walking with us through this strange and sacred terrain. We hope something met you here. If this episode stirred something in you, or if you'd simply like to linger longer, we'd love for you to visit freshgroundtheology.com. There you'll find our episode notes and occasional essays and blog posts on these subjects and many others. You can also connect to our community at Fresh Ground Theology on Facebook, or listen and subscribe on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts, wherever you like to pour your coffee and press play. And if you want to wear some theology on your sleeve, quite literally, our merch store is open now. Every item is made to evoke wonder, silence, and maybe raise an eyebrow from your reformed uncle. You can check it out through the link on the site. Special thanks, as you always know, to Anton Koryakov for the beautiful theme music. We also want to offer a deep gratitude to the scholars and thinkers whose work helped guide today's conversation. Zoe Brennan Crone for her hauntingly beautiful thesis, In the Nearness of Our Striving, which gave voice to a kind of love that doesn't ask us to prove ourselves. To Deborah Cabanas and colleagues for their clinical wisdom and the psychodynamic formulation. To Anne Freud, whose work, The Ego and Mechanisms of Defense, remains a deep well for understanding. To Mark Standage, Joanne Duda, and Anne-Marie Pensgard for their study on motivational structures and the cost of ego-involving climates on our mental and emotional well-being. And to Goey Coop and Decline edit. And to Goey Coop and Decline for offering a scientific lens for how our highest goals collapse under strain. Each of these voices helped light the lantern we carried today, and may their insight echo gently in your own reflections. Until next time, may you be kind to your striving. May you honor the silence. But until next time, may God see you as you dwell in silence. May God bless you as you come to Him. And may you remember that even in the dark, God is with you. Grace and peace.